Lucas still remembered the moment the court clerk called his name, a moment that felt unreal even weeks later. At 28, he never imagined he would stand in a courtroom because his own parents had decided to sue him. The reason sounded so ridiculous that people laughed whenever he explained it. His parents believed he had abandoned the family because he refused to let his older brother move into his house. Lucas had worked his entire life to build stability. Now that stability was under attack simply because his brother Ryan had been evicted once again. Growing up in a quiet suburb in Ohio, Lucas realized very early that his family operated under two completely different rule books. One set existed for Ryan, the golden child who could never do anything wrong. The other set existed for Lucas, the forgotten younger son who was expected to be perfect. Ryan could break rules, fail classes, and argue with teachers without serious consequences. Lucas, however, faced lectures for even the smallest mistake. If Ryan stayed out late, their parents called it independence. If Lucas stayed out past 8, they called it irresponsibility. Lucas clearly remembered the night Ryan crashed their father's car when he was 17. Ryan had been texting while driving and slammed the car straight into a mailbox on their street. Instead of punishment, Ryan received sympathy and encouragement from both parents. 2 weeks later, they even bought him another used car so he could learn from his mistake. Meanwhile, when Lucas once brought home a B+ on a chemistry test, his mother sat him down for a 2-hour lecture about wasted potential. Lucas stared quietly at the table, wondering why his effort never seemed enough. School achievements only made the difference between the brothers more obvious. Ryan's average grades were treated like huge victories. Whenever he managed to pass a semester with decent marks, their parents celebrated him with dinner and praise. Lucas, however, worked endlessly and maintained straight A's throughout high school. Most of the time his reward was nothing more than a quiet nod. One semester he made honor roll for the 6th time in a row. His mother glanced at the certificate and calmly said, "Well, you're supposed to do well." That moment stayed with Lucas. Holidays showed the same favoritism year after year. Christmas mornings often felt like an event designed entirely for Ryan. Huge piles of presents surrounded Ryan's side of the living room while Lucas opened only a few small boxes. One year Ryan received a gaming console, the newest phone, and even a dirt bike. Lucas unwrapped socks, a calculator, and a small toolkit. When he looked confused, his mother casually explained, "Ryan appreciates things differently." Lucas didn't argue, but inside he made a quiet decision that day. One day he would build a life completely on his own. Birthdays followed the same pattern that had shaped Lucas's childhood. Ryan's birthdays were always large celebrations with rented venues, decorations, and long guest lists filled with friends and relatives. Music played, food filled the tables, and their parents acted like it was the most important day of the year. Lucas's birthdays felt completely different. Sometimes his mother would casually ask a few days before, "Do you even want a party this year?" The way she asked made the answer obvious. By the time Lucas turned 14, he simply said no every year. Their father admired Ryan in a way Lucas never experienced. When Ryan made the junior varsity soccer team as a sophomore, their father threw a small party and invited neighbors to celebrate. When Ryan barely graduated high school with poor grades, their father cried proud tears and hugged him in front of everyone. When Lucas graduated as the second-best student in his class and earned a full academic scholarship to Ohio State University, his father only patted his shoulder and said, "Good job." A few minutes later he asked if Lucas had seen Ryan's new sneakers. Being the child who received little attention taught Lucas an important lesson early in life. He stopped expecting encouragement from his parents. He stopped hoping they would notice his effort. Instead, he focused entirely on building his own future. Lucas worked part-time jobs all through high school, saving every dollar he could. At 14, he bagged groceries at a small local store. By 16, he worked evenings at a neighborhood hardware shop. The older workers there often gave him advice about tools, repairs, and responsibility, lessons he rarely received at home. One of the workers at the hardware store was an older retired plumber named George. George noticed Lucas's work ethic and often showed him how to fix small household problems. One evening after closing the shop, George watched Lucas repair a broken pipe fitting and nodded approvingly. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," he told him. "Stay focused and you'll go far." That simple sentence meant more to Lucas than any praise he had received from his parents. Even years later, Lucas still remembered that moment clearly. College became Lucas's escape and the beginning of a completely different life. At Ohio State University he studied mechanical engineering and focused intensely on his future. While Ryan drifted between short-term jobs and asked their parents for constant financial help, Lucas built something stable for himself. After graduating with honors, he secured a solid engineering position at a manufacturing company. Over the next few years he saved carefully and avoided unnecessary spending. By the age of 25, Lucas had enough money for a down payment on a modest 3-bedroom house. Signing those papers felt like freedom. Lucas still remembered the day he received the keys to his house. It was not a mansion, just a simple 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood. But to him it represented years of discipline and independence. Every payment he made came from his own effort, not family help. The small office room allowed him to do freelance engineering work at night, which brought in extra income. The second spare room stayed ready for occasional guests. Lucas valued the calm atmosphere of his home. It was peaceful, organized, and completely under his control. Ryan's life moved in the opposite direction. While Lucas built stability, Ryan moved through a cycle of short jobs and constant excuses. He never kept a job longer than a few months. According to Ryan, every problem was someone else's fault. One manager was too strict, another schedule was unfair, and some jobs were simply beneath him. Each time something failed, Ryan called their parents for help. They always responded with sympathy and financial support. Responsibility never truly reached him because someone else always cleaned up the consequences. Ryan's first eviction happened when he was 24. He had rented a small studio apartment but stopped paying rent after only a few months. When the landlord asked about the missing payments, Ryan claimed the landlord had a bad attitude and unreasonable expectations. Eventually the eviction notice arrived. Their parents immediately paid the overdue rent and moved Ryan back into their home. Instead of learning a lesson, Ryan treated the situation like a temporary inconvenience. He spent most nights playing video games and sleeping late the following afternoon. The second eviction occurred 3 years later when Ryan moved in with his girlfriend, Emma. Emma worked 2 jobs and tried to support their small apartment while Ryan remained unemployed most of the time. Eventually the pressure became too much. After months of arguments and unpaid bills, Emma finally asked him to leave. Ryan owed several months of shared expenses. Once again their parents stepped in and paid the debt. Ryan returned home like nothing unusual had happened. The cycle repeated with frustrating predictability. Living at their parents' house again changed Ryan's attitude even more. Instead of feeling embarrassed, he acted like he was doing them a favor by being there. He ate their food, increased their bills, and still complained about minor things. If the grocery brand was not his favorite, he made sarcastic comments during dinner. Lucas heard about these problems during occasional phone calls from his parents. They sounded exhausted but still defended Ryan's behavior. "He's going through a difficult time," his mother often explained. The third eviction happened the year before everything exploded. Ryan had convinced a friend named Tyler to let him stay in his apartment temporarily. In exchange, Ryan promised to help with chores and contribute to expenses. In reality, Ryan barely lifted a finger. Tyler quickly grew frustrated watching Ryan eat his groceries and ignore every responsibility. After 2 months, Tyler finally changed the locks while Ryan was out. Ryan returned to their parents' house once again, carrying the same excuses and the same lack of accountability. At that point, their parents were approaching their late 50s and beginning to talk seriously about retirement. They often called Lucas to complain about the stress of supporting Ryan. Yet every conversation ended the same way. They sympathized with Ryan and continued helping him. Lucas tried to stay neutral during these discussions. He offered polite advice but avoided becoming involved in their family drama. Years of favoritism had taught him one important lesson. The safest place for his peace of mind was distance. Lucas visited his parents only a few times each year. Family dinners often felt awkward and tense. Ryan usually spent most of the meal staring at his phone while occasionally asking Lucas if he could borrow money. Lucas always refused politely but firmly. Each refusal irritated Ryan, who believed family members should automatically help each other. Lucas disagreed. In his mind, helping someone repeatedly without accountability only encouraged more irresponsible behavior. That belief would soon become the center of a much larger conflict. About 8 months before the court case, Lucas attended one of these uncomfortable family dinners. Halfway through the meal, his parents announced exciting news. They planned to sell their house and move to Arizona for retirement. The warm weather and a nearby relative made the plan attractive to them. Lucas congratulated them sincerely. It sounded like a reasonable decision after many years of work. But only seconds later, his mother added another sentence that immediately changed the entire mood of the evening. "Well, of course Ryan will need somewhere to stay," his mother said casually. Lucas looked up in confusion as she continued explaining the idea. Since Lucas owned a 3-bedroom house, they believed Ryan could move in with him temporarily. According to them, it would only last 6 months or maybe a year until Ryan found stability. Lucas nearly choked on his drink. His quiet home suddenly felt like it was being volunteered without his permission. Slowly he set the glass down and said calmly, "That's not going to work for me." The table became quiet after Lucas spoke. His father frowned in confusion as if Lucas had just said something completely unreasonable. "Why not?" he asked slowly. "You have plenty of space." Lucas explained calmly that the extra rooms were not empty bedrooms. One room was his home office where he handled freelance engineering work. The other room was reserved for occasional guests. "Having space doesn't mean I want a roommate," Lucas added. Ryan barely looked up from his phone during the conversation, clearly expecting everyone else to solve his problems. Lucas's mother tried another approach. She leaned forward and spoke gently as if explaining something obvious to a stubborn child. "It would only be temporary," she insisted. 6 months, maybe a year. Just until Ryan saves some money. Lucas struggled to hide his disbelief. Ryan had lived with their parents on and off for nearly a decade and had never saved anything. Most of his money went toward games, food delivery, and impulsive spending. The idea that Ryan would suddenly become responsible under Lucas's roof sounded unrealistic. "I'm sorry," Lucas finally said, keeping his voice polite but firm. "I'm not in a position to take on a roommate right now." His father sighed heavily, clearly frustrated by the answer. The conversation quickly turned uncomfortable. His parents kept presenting different arguments about family responsibility. They claimed Ryan could help around the house and learn discipline from Lucas's example. Lucas listened patiently but repeated the same answer each time. No matter how they framed it, his decision remained unchanged. When Lucas left that night, the tension in the house felt obvious. His parents looked disappointed, almost offended, as if Lucas had betrayed them. Ryan, however, barely reacted at all. He simply shrugged and returned his attention to his phone. The entire situation felt strangely familiar to Lucas. His parents were once again trying to solve Ryan's problems by placing the responsibility on someone else. This time, however, Lucas refused to participate. 4 months later, Lucas's parents completed their move to Arizona. Before leaving, they rented a small apartment for Ryan near their old neighborhood. They paid the security deposit and the first 3 months of rent to give him a fresh start. Lucas heard about the arrangement during a short phone call with his mother. She sounded hopeful that Ryan would finally become independent. Lucas said little, though he privately doubted the situation would last very long. Unfortunately, his doubts proved correct. Ryan managed to stay in the apartment for only 2.5 months before problems appeared again. Neighbors began complaining about loud parties that lasted late into the night. The landlord also discovered damage in the bathroom wall after one of Ryan's arguments with a guest. When the prepaid rent ran out, Ryan stopped paying entirely. Soon the landlord filed an eviction notice. It was Ryan's 4th eviction in less than 10 years. The day the eviction happened, Lucas received a frantic phone call from his parents. His mother sounded close to tears while explaining the situation. "Ryan has nowhere to go," she said urgently. "He could end up on the street." A moment later, his father took the phone with a firm tone. "You need to let Ryan stay with you," he said. Lucas noticed the difference immediately. This was no longer a request. Lucas answered calmly but clearly. "No," he said. His father sounded shocked by the simple response. "He's your brother," his father insisted. "Family supports family." Lucas took a slow breath before replying. "Ryan is 31 years old," he said. "He needs to solve his own problems." His mother returned to the phone and began listing all the ways they believed Lucas owed the family support. The conversation quickly turned emotional. They accused Lucas of abandoning his family and punishing Ryan for past mistakes. To Lucas, the situation felt absurd. Ryan's 4 evictions were not small accidents. They were the result of years of irresponsible behavior. Lucas repeated his answer again and again until the conversation became exhausting. Eventually he ended the call and blocked their numbers for 2 days just to give himself peace. Over the following weeks the pressure increased in unexpected ways. Relatives Lucas barely spoke to suddenly contacted him with strong opinions. An aunt sent messages about family loyalty. A distant cousin tried to lecture him online about compassion. Even his grandmother gently suggested he reconsider helping Ryan. Lucas explained the full story whenever someone asked, though many people only heard the emotional version told by his parents. Despite the criticism, Lucas remained firm. His house, his decision. He had already seen how this story would end. Lucas believed the situation would eventually calm down if he stayed consistent. Unfortunately, his parents had other plans. About 6 weeks later, a thick envelope arrived in his mailbox from a law office he had never heard of before. Curious and slightly confused, Lucas opened it at his kitchen table. As he read the letter, he actually laughed out loud. The document claimed his parents were considering legal action against him for familial abandonment, because he refused to house his brother. The claim sounded so unbelievable it almost felt like a bad joke. Lucas immediately called an old college friend named Daniel who now worked as a lawyer. After hearing the situation, Daniel laughed just as hard. "There is no law that forces someone to house an adult sibling," he explained. "That concept simply does not exist." However, Daniel advised Lucas to take the letter seriously and respond through an attorney. Even weak claims still require a legal response. Following the advice, Lucas hired a local lawyer named Mr. Carter who specialized in civil cases. Mr. Carter responded with a formal letter explaining that the accusations had no legal basis. He made it clear that Lucas had every right to decide who lived in his house. Lucas believed that would end the situation. Reasonable people would realize the case had no chance of success. Unfortunately, his parents were not ready to back down. 2 weeks later, Lucas received official court papers. They had actually filed a lawsuit demanding $50,000 in damages. The lawsuit claimed Lucas had caused emotional distress by refusing to support his brother. Mr. Carter reviewed the documents and shook his head in disbelief. "This case is extremely weak," he said calmly. "But we still need to respond and appear in court." During the discovery phase, Mr. Carter requested financial records and communications from Lucas's parents. What arrived turned out to be extremely revealing. Among the documents were years of bank statements showing regular payments sent from Lucas's parents to Ryan. The records revealed monthly transfers that sometimes reached $800 or more. Over 5 years, the total exceeded $40,000. But the most important evidence appeared in several email messages between Lucas's parents. In those emails, they discussed their retirement plan. Their idea was simple. Once they moved away, Lucas would take over the responsibility of supporting Ryan. When Mr. Carter read the emails, he smiled. "These documents explain everything," he said. "The lawsuit was never about emotional pain or family duty. It was about money." Lucas's parents wanted the court to force him to take responsibility for Ryan's living expenses. With that evidence prepared, the court date finally arrived. Lucas dressed professionally and arrived early that morning, determined to remain calm. Inside the courtroom, the judge listened carefully as both sides presented their arguments. Lucas's parents' lawyer spoke first, describing family bonds and emotional responsibility. However, he failed to mention any law requiring Lucas to house his brother. When Mr. Carter spoke, he calmly explained Ryan's eviction history and presented the emails revealing the real motive behind the lawsuit. The judge listened quietly, occasionally raising an eyebrow. Then the judge asked Ryan to speak. Ryan answered a few basic questions about his housing situation and job plans. When Mr. Carter asked where he currently lived, Ryan casually explained that he had been staying on a friend's couch for 2 months. The judge immediately noticed the contradiction. In the lawsuit, Lucas's parents had claimed Ryan was homeless. Ryan shrugged and explained something even more revealing. "My parents just thought it would save them money if my brother let me move in," Ryan said without hesitation. "They figured Lucas has the extra space anyway." The courtroom became completely silent. Ryan had accidentally revealed the entire plan under oath. The judge looked directly at Lucas's parents before announcing her decision. The case had no legal merit and was dismissed immediately. She also ordered Lucas's parents to pay his legal fees for filing a frivolous lawsuit. Weeks later, the situation finally settled down. Lucas continued living peacefully in his home and received a promotion at work that increased his salary. Ryan drifted from place to place, still refusing to change his behavior. Lucas's parents remained distant, embarrassed by the failed lawsuit and its consequences. One evening, Lucas sat quietly on his porch, reflecting on everything that had happened. For the first time in a long while, his life felt calm and stable again. Sometimes the strongest decision a person can make is simply refusing to carry someone else's burden.